So let's start maybe our session. Thank you very much for joining the session today. And we are going to speak about how urban planning can support and advance the important agenda that we are talking today, which is building decarbonisation and climate resilient built environment. So let me introduce the session with a couple of personal insights. So we know that urban planning is not a separate emission sector. It's more an enabler, a cross-cutting enabler of emission reduction and climate resilience. It is also a powerful way for local governments, cities, and metropolitan area to mainstream their climate action into legally binding policies. The latest IPCC report highlights the importance of land use planning, urban planning to accelerate climate action. They indicate that by adopting better land use policies, local government could reduce their emission by approximately 25%. And we have more and more local studies that are showing this evidence. Recently, the University of Berkeley in North America analyze the different policies of the local government of California. And it actually shows that the most impactful policies that cities could take to reduce their emission is revising their land use policies, stopping urban sprawl, developing infill policies, densification. That's what needs to be done right now. So in the past, urban planning was mostly seen as a way to reduce transport emission by supporting mode shift with approach like the transit-oriented development, 15-minute cities. But now it's clearer and clearer that it's also very important to reduce buildings emission and to mainstream climate resilience. Let me give you a few elements in that sense. Urban planning regulates the overall morphology of a city and buildings, the place where we will build, the density, but also the way of building, the orientation of the building, the form of the building, as well as I forget to pass the slide. I don't think it's worked actually. As well as the characteristic of the building. So, for example, a compact cities will de facto reduce the energy use of the building and the embodied emission from the construction. There is a recent study from RMI who show the impact on carbon emission from this type of policies. Another example, we know that cities are made of approximately 30 to 40% of I'm not good with slide today. Sorry, whatever. 30% of public space, and the rest is mostly privately owned land. So, of course, when we need to develop nature-based solutions and increase climate resilience, it's not possible to focus only on public space and open space. It is also very important that we regulate private development so they can also contribute to the important effort on nature-based solution and climate adaptation. Finally, we know that today, urban expansion that happen in global north in global south are for 90% happening in climate risk zone or near climate risk zone. So it is absolutely essential that cities and local government get the spatial climate data risk that they need to take informed decision when they are revising their urban planning policies and their master plan. So urban planning is key for climate action, is key for building emission, it's key for climate resilience. And we know that the way we have planned our city since the past century, since after World War II, is not longer working for the world. It promotes urban sprawl, it promotes low density development, it promotes an over-specialization of the land use and the neighborhood. It also promotes unsustainable building form and building characteristics. So it is urgent to change the way we plan our cities and to integrate carbon objective, especially on building and climate resilience. So to open, so our session today will be organized mainly around two main panels. One, which is about land use policies to decarbonize building, and the second panel about land use policies to accelerate climate resilience. And then we'll conclude our session with remarks from the representative of Egypt and UNEP, who will state the call for action that we have prepared with the organizations that have been organizing this session. C40, I'm the director of urban planning at C40, as well as UN Habitat, UNEP, USGBC, and Architecture 2030. But to start, I would like to invite on stage Laura Petrella, who is the chief of the section Urban Planning, Finance and Economy at UN Habitat. Laura, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Hélène, and very happy to be able to speak at this gathering within a conference on buildings and been talking about urban planning and actually a little bit of design. So, I don't know where I do. Yes, just as a context, and I think Hélène has already mentioned some of these trends and issues related to both the hazard and increasing impact of climate on cities, but also the demographic trends that are making us facing an exponential growth, actually, not only of urban population, but actually of the space and the buildings that are requested to host them decently within cities, and also fundamentally the lack of good and well-organized planning and design of the cities, particularly in the global south. I don't know where I have to.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's a bit confusing. So we are facing huge challenges, and we need actually a significant shift in urban planning. So it's not just a matter of putting urban planning in the center a little bit more when we talk about decarbonization and adaptation of cities and also of buildings, but also to be able to leverage adequate urban planning and design as an integrating tool and as well as system thinking that allows us to bring together different elements of influence on the built environment and the behaviors also of residents and urban dwellers. And finally, we need to have a territorial and climate specific approach so that the conditions within even building are better influenced by the way we design and organize the space around them, the neighborhood level mainly, actually. So I just want to go through very rapidly what are the issues that we face and that we need to consider. First of all, urban planning and design tools and instruments are not extensively used and able to be implemented in many cities. This is African informal settlement. So we need to extend the use and enforce the capacity. We need to address urban sprawl, it has been mentioned, but the growth, it is largely more than proportional between the growth of population and the growth of urban land uses, with a very horizontal expansion of many cities, and very few cities globally are actually expanding vertically. These are WRI studies, and the picture is from Lagos. We also have to recognize that certain patterns are less sustainable than others, and they have an embedded consumption of energy and request for carbon emission that it is very specific to the patterns, particularly when we have low density and distributed settlements. We have here the comparison between Pittsburgh and Stockholm with similar GDP, the amount of, let's say, emission or similar GDP, actually even higher GDP in Stockholm, the amount of emission directly influenced by the actual pattern of low density in the city is quite striking. This is also because we are not talking only about sprawl in poor cities or in low-income global south cities. We are also talking of high consumption patterns of the sprawl, in particular in developed countries, where the preference often for single dwellings, etc., has a huge energy demand on top of course, land consumption demand, and this is just illustrative. So what about medium density and complex neighborhood? These are the patterns that have demonstrated to have the best, let's say, outcome in terms of energy efficiency, both for the build but also for the overall use of energy for the functioning of these patterns. They support walkable cities and neighborhoods through mixed use and the proximity of function, etc. But they also create a microclimate. And in particular, I wanted to mention the possibility and the importance of deploying urban design tools and solutions, which actually improve the quality of the microclimate and mitigate, for instance, many of the requirements for cooling or warming within the buildings. Finally, there is quite a lot of studies on the vicious cycle of wrong design of neighborhood and building and settlement in general, where the morphology and other site features have an important impact on local temperature, for instance, and all the discussion on the urban heat islands and how to mitigate it. And the example on the other side is the vicious cycle, actually, of using conditioning and not being able to create more bioclimatic solutions. So at the neighborhood level, at the scale of the site, urban design is also particularly important. So not only urban planning, but also a more detailed design at the site level. And this is also very relevant for the planning regulation and the development regulation, the street patterns, the relation between the building and the open space that has been also mentioned. So do we have good planning and design that we can consider smart as well from a point of view of climate? I think what we have been working on as UN Habitat and also the international community has been to promote what we call planning for a sustainable city, which works to revert urban sprawl to compactness, reduce segregation towards integration, and works against congestion through connectivity. We have a number of tools globally which are being adopted also by member states to help us in this transition. I wanted to mention just a few. The international guidelines on urban and territorial planning, they are also mentioned in the new urban agenda as a reference for improving planning system. And this is referring to my first point on the need for stronger planning system and better capacity. We, as UN Habitat, we developed the 5 principles of sustainable neighborhood, which are about mixed land use, social mixed, adequate density, limited land use specialization, and translated them into my neighborhood guidance, which also look at them in an integrated way, how they can support at different scale livable cities that are compact and connected. And finally, we have worked on energy and resource-efficient urban neighborhood design principles, which go very much into the details of what needs to be done at the scale of the neighborhood on energy efficiency and resource efficiency. And everything needs to come together into planning that is actually recognized within municipal frameworks, and we have tried to develop support to that process through our city plan. So I just talked about UN Habitat, but this is not an effort that is only, sorry, I don't know, it's here. It's not only UN Habitat. Many organizations, cities, associations, and initiatives are active in this field. There is a wealth of knowledge, has been mentioned, some research and practical experience. But what we need now is actually translating this into flow of resources, first of all, to cities in capacities that enable them to be applied and reach out actually to the cities of the developing world, which absolutely need, given the patterns and the speed of their urban expansion, a lot of, let's say, access to good practices and resources to be able to deal with these things. So I want to acknowledge all the partners that over time have been working on these issues. Many will speak today, and also mention that this conversation moves from COP28, where we were actually discussing these issues as well, to some extent, decarbonisation through planning. We hope to influence the report on cities of the ICCP, which is a very important milestone for this conversation. And of course, the COP28 and 29 and 30 will be very important appointments for this community to continue this conversation. And I hope the discussion today will bring in even more inspiration and good practices in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. And actually, it's a fantastic transition to the panel and to the discussion we will try to have now. It's about how we make it happen. All the transformation, we know what needs to be done, how we make it happen. And let me maybe introduce the first panel. So we'll discuss about land use policies for decarbonisation of building with a few examples of policies that cities have taken to reduce their emission. First, Portland in Oregon. The metropolitan area of Portland has just passed a new regulation that set urban growth boundaries. And at the same time, the cities has totally reversed their residential policies that has been developing these urban sprawl and develop some facilities for infill policies and smaller housing units. Another example is the city of Vancouver, and the former mayor of Vancouver, who is actually has been pushing this agenda, is in the room now, so wanted to pay tribute, has really included in their land use policies the need for integrating and submitting a whole life cycle assessment while developing their building permit. The City of London has recently integrated in their land use policies facilitation and incentive for conversion of vacant offices and commercial space into housing. They have also identified areas where every new building needs to be connected to heating system and cooling communal system. And finally, the city of Medellin in Colombia has integrated a sustainable construction manual in the city's land use plan that provide advice, but also fiscal support for the developers that will develop circularity principle and low carbon materials. So this is just a few examples. Now let's dig a little bit more in the detail, and I'm happy to invite on stage Stéphane Leclerc, who is the director of urban planning of the city of Paris, Monica Conrad, who is the deputy director of the urban planning department of the city of Warsaw, Kelly Alvarez Doran, who is from Architecture 2030, the senior fellow at Architecture 2030, co-founder of Climate Design and professor at the University of Toronto, and Christian Hernandez, who is a member of the Executive Leadership Council of Urban Partners and Managing Partner at 2050. And actually, I think I will join you. And Kelly, does that work? Yes. So Kelly, my first question is actually for you. So you have been working closely with the City of Toronto to help them with their building decarbonisation strategy. You are co-authored of the North American first embodied carbon target for cities. So could you please share with us a little bit how the urban planning policy of the City of Toronto has impact embodied emission and building emission in the city, and maybe share with us some of the recommendations that you are actually discussing with them for the next amendment of their land use policies.
Absolutely, thank you, and great to follow Laura. So I'm a Canadian architect. I come from the highest GDP emissions per capita of G20 nations, and a lot of it has to do with our built environment. I'm co-author of this policy, the City of Toronto, the first, following Vancouver's footsteps, first city in North America with maximum targets. You can see we did an extensive benchmarking of building types to set these targets to, and that these targets will step down over the decade. But in developing this, whilst the research that I've been leading at the University of Toronto, when you start digging into, like, what does 500 kilograms per square meter really mean? And you have to look deeper into buildings to understand where emissions live. And so here's an illustration of where the emissions live across residential structures in Toronto. You can see in low-rise stick frame construction, the majority is in the foundations. Even in the mid-rise and tall buildings, up to 50% of a building's emissions could be below grade, or I like to say our buildings are icebergs. And the question is why? Why is this happening? Well, there's primarily two reasons that are planning policies. I've come to understand that in Toronto, like much of North America, architects don't design buildings, planners do. And planning bylaw designs buildings specifically, the language in how we regulate what we can build. And so in the City of Toronto, there's exceptions, like these two that I've underlined, that are across North America and the world, which make building basements essentially a loophole in planning policy. So what the city is saying here is that you can build a basement because it's an exception in your coverage in any low-rise construction. And then if you're doing in mid and tall buildings, we've got minimum parking requirements for you to fulfill. But don't worry, you can put them underground. We, urban design and planning, would prefer that parking is out of sight, out of mind. And so what you do is you see these incredibly deep holes that we fill cars with that are incredibly carbon intensive. And this is all the product of planning bylaw, planning language. Now, after that has come, I'm now currently working with the city to review the urban design guidelines for mid, tall, and low buildings. And so many cities have these, basically very prescriptive means of how they describe new buildings. So this is evidence of the mid-rise guidelines, and what you can see here on the left are the things that these angular planes, again, not unique to Toronto, worldwide. You see this phenomena, these rear transition plane. First is that they wanted to say, what would happen if we changed the dimensions around rear transition planes? And so we did case studies of real buildings. So you can see here is a mid-rise building housing in Toronto, and you can see the allocation of embodied carbon across the section of the building. I'd ask, are we building parking or are we building housing? And we did these counterfactual studies. So if you went from a condition of these kind of wedding cake as a product of the setbacks to simpler forms, you can see that even controlling for reinforced concrete, there's big reductions, but the building on the right can be built out of many different material opportunities here. This could be wood, this can be mass timber. The building on the left can only be built out of reinforced concrete. So I think that while we're looking at decarbonizing a lot of these materials, we need to look first at the things that are causing the volumes and material usage in and of themselves, and that starts with planning language. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think your point about the importance of the underground level and how they consume embodied emission was very, very important. I now turn over to Stéphane Leclerc. Paris is currently finalizing its new bioclimatic PLU, the French master plan, and how you have used this important document to integrate innovative new policies to tackle building emission. And could you please share a few ideas with us?
Yes, thank you, Hélène. Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here in Paris, in a place which is also a good example of what we are doing at the moment, because you have perhaps noticed that there have been big works in front of the building. This used to be a major roundabout with the highway, the boulevard périphérique, and we just totally revamped the place. We extended the wood, which is coming on the square, and we're building new public transport stations with a new tramway just in front of the building and a new underground line. So this is how we're transforming the mobility. But to come back to the issue of today, this slide shows you the carbon emissions of the city of Paris, which were calculated in 2021. It's 18 million tons of CO2 every year. And as you will see, about 25% of these emissions come from the construction and the building sector altogether. Part of them comes from the construction itself of buildings, what we just saw at the moment, how you build, how you have deep holes, etc. And a part of them comes, of course, from the maintenance, the heating, the refreshing, how the building lives for its whole life. So that's a major part of the strategy to reduce carbon emissions, 25%. Here you see the way we've already gone in Paris for a few years and the target. The target is very clear. It's the same for most cities in the world, most countries. It's a carbon neutrality by 2050. And you see that we've made progress. A part of this progress comes from the mobility sector. You have perhaps noticed, if you just had a look at the streets of Paris, about the real revolution that we have gone through the past years with, for example, bicycle. We've more than doubled the number of bicycles in the streets of Paris. This is a result of very ambitious policy to build bike lanes everywhere in the city to provide security for bicycles. We have a major public transport network which is very efficient, so that few people have the need to take their car in Paris. So this is one of the components, but we also tackle the issue of buildings, and you will see how we do that. The tool for that is, as Hélène mentioned, the bioclimatic master plan. We have at the moment a land use plan in Paris, which dates back to 2006, and the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, wanted that we revise this document so that we set an international example how a big city, a big attractive city, a big dense city such as Paris can show the way and to be at the level of what the Paris Agreement of 2015 of the COP21 set to reduce drastically the level of carbon emissions. So how do we do this in Paris, which is already nearly totally built city, very mineral city? The first key strategy is to change the paradigm of a land use plan. Usually, a land use plan defines how you can build. In the future, in Paris, we will build very, very little. The main aim is to do with the existing buildings, to see how we can transform them, to avoid demolition. Demolition is very intensive in terms of carbon, and to transform the buildings so that they can have new lives without having to spend a lot of carbon. I will show a few illustrations after that. The second key element is to accelerate the thermal insulation of existing buildings. Depending on the periods when the buildings were constructed, their efficiency, their thermal efficiency can be very different. We have some what we call in French passoire thermique. I don't know how you would define this in English, but buildings where the heat goes through the walls and the cold comes from the exterior. So we have to be much more ambitious, to go much quicker. It's an issue of environmental reduction of emissions, but it's also a social issue because we know that since the war in Ukraine, the price of energy, as you know, has jumpeted, and many people find it more and more hard to pay for their heating at home. So this is a both environmental and social issue. So it's what we call sustainable development. I will show you a few ways how to achieve that. We have to move much quicker to renewable energies. We have the chance in France to have globally energy and electricity which comes from low carbon sources, but we can go much further. And the cities are places where you can develop renewable energy. For example, if you think of roofs, terraces, we have hundreds of hectares of roofs which are useless today. Why don't we go to develop photovoltaic production of energy on all these roofs, which are directly oriented in the right way to the sun? There is also the question of building materials. We know that cement, concrete have a very, very bad CO2 balance. So we decide to move very strongly to the end of concrete. So it will be difficult to end it completely. We need concrete, for example, for lifts, for a basement, but we can move much faster to renewable, natural building materials, such as wood, such as stone, such as straw. And we want that all new buildings in Paris, all transformations of buildings, use mostly renewable, natural materials. Lastly, we have to reduce the energy used for building itself. For example, basement for car parks are a very good example. In Paris, we don't impose anymore car parking constructions under the buildings. And what we see is that the promoters of the buildings, they don't build them anymore because it's a source of economy for them. And the public transport network is so efficient that we don't need to provide cars for every apartment, for every worker in buildings. So that's a major economic and environmental tool for the future of the city. And lastly, we have to reinvent some old traditional techniques which were used in the past. So, for example, shutters on buildings. There is nothing more efficient to prevent you from heating than preventing the sun from going into the building through the window. So this is something very archaic, but it's very efficient. So it's much more efficient than to have air conditioning, which uses energy as well. So that's all that's at the heart of the new bioclimatic urban plan. A few illustrations to finish. As I mentioned, the new paradigm, don't demolish, don't build. Do with what exists. Most buildings, if they are built in a proper way, can have centuries of life. Maybe some of them millenarians of life. We still have Greek temples in Greece, so why don't we have buildings that we built for centuries in front of us? These buildings can have several lives. They can have accommodation, and then in the future they can welcome, I don't know, shops. They can have doctors' offices, etc., etc. You have to think of key rules to achieve that. How do you transform the buildings? For example, we can raise their number of stories. We can elevate them. You can extend them. You can add some exterior extensions to provide, for example, balconies, which are very pleasant for the people living in buildings to have a little place outside of their home, which is very important when you live in dense areas such as Paris, where you don't have a garden. So all these tools are very easy to implement, provided that you have the political ambitions to do that. It's more easy to transform buildings which are transformable, of course. That leads to the question of reversibility of buildings. We know that some techniques of constructions are more easy to transform. That's the question of pole and beam framework instead of concrete walls, which are very difficult to transform. So the more the buildings are reversible, transformable, the more they can live a long time, and the fewer energy you have to spend to transform them. You have also to think of very basic things, such as to provide natural ventilation in building. If you have double orientation, dual aspect apartments, you can have one side of the apartment which opens on the north side of the building, where the air is cooler in the night, where the sun doesn't come, and you can provide natural ventilation without using energy once again. So all this goes in the same direction. And lastly, this is an example of the kinds of buildings which we want to promote now in Paris. I spoke of wood. stone, straw, and it's very easy actually to build some dense buildings in wood. Our ancestors did this for centuries. It was normal at the time. So why don't we come back to such techniques which can provide very low carbon emission cities?
Thank you very much, Stéphane. What is very interesting in what you say is that this good principle, I think we share. The real matter is how we mainstream them, how we put them in legally binding documents. And the work you have done with the new PLU of Paris, with the political support, as you say, I think is in that sense very transformative. It's not one example of a project. All of the new projects in Paris will have to integrate this very important policy. And that's why at C40, we really think now the idea is to mainstream, how we make these general. We have been, all of us, in a lot of conferences where we show great example of project. The real topic is how we transpose them into legally binding policies. And this is why urban planning and land use policies are so important. Monica, thank you very much for coming from Warsaw to be with us. So the city of Warsaw is now working on a sustainable urban morphology guidance and policies. Could you please tell us a little bit more about this approach?
Yes, indeed, we do work on the strategic master plan that we hope that is going to be bioclimatic. We do everything to achieve it. But I will start from some other scale of the building. The success of the energy transition at the local level depends on the action of municipal authorities. That's how it actually is coming. And what we're trying to do at the moment is to introduce set of standards. So what we see on the picture is Warsaw Green Building Standard. That is just a starting point. We are developing it to be implemented only for the municipal buildings at the beginning. The next step will be to encourage developers to use the same standards. They are pretty high. They are higher than any regulations. So we know that actually we have a lot of discussion because it's just like, I think next month is going to be announced. And do we actually will afford it to build? But we have to do it. It's just necessary to make step forward and to give a good example. So we have certain categories. You could see that it's not only building, it's as well as surrounding areas. So a plot level. What is very important is for us the greenery and plot development. And here we are introducing biotope area indicator that depends on the surface where it's used. Is actually we are inspired by Berlin standards. However, I know from Berlin how costly it is to implement it. So we know that there will be a lot of challenges, and we are ready to adapt it. So, but and the other factors that are necessary to incorporate will be the global warming potential that each investor has to develop an environmental product declaration, and of course life cycle cost analysis and more. So we see like 6 categories. But that's the one of the step. Next, what we are doing at the moment, we're trying to do the same for historical buildings because that will be even more challenging. Oh yeah, here is the.
This is a challenge.
Yes.
Here we are.
Here we are. So, but we're talking about the strategic level. And on the strategic level, we are developing urban planning policy where we will set rules to develop resilient living environment. And we like to do it in the form of requirements for existing and new urban fabric. So the starting point was the examination of existing city structure. We evaluated it in order to develop quality of life. So what you could see here on the picture is just 2 types of indicators, is floor area ratio and biology active surface ratio. We examined a lot of them. That's to see what is at the moment what we are missing. Warsaw is a polycentric city with a lot of different, characters of urban morphology. But the biggest problems are actually urban sprawl. That's the biggest problem. And we do not have any greenery sometimes in the city center. The city developed very rapidly with lack actually of regulations. So that's why we are suffering at the moment, and now we have to have very strict rules. But yes. So by introducing desirable types of morphology for new development into existing gaps in already built environment and in brownfields, because it's important how the city is going to grow, we will reduce building and transportation emission. That's the plan. And in this way, we are going to improve the quality of life. No matter what is the desired density and how to implement, that's what we are still checking. And we know that the ratio that I was showing in the previous slide, that is biologically active surface, that is very important. And we know that mid-rise density is the one that we really desire. But we do have already neighborhoods that reach this density. How we are actually changing them, that's the question. We should not build new buildings, where we are searching for new areas, and how to actually make a network of neighborhoods that are connected together. And here we are going to the network of open spaces that are interlinked with public transport and blue and green infrastructure to, in the end, create an environment that we call urban ecosystem, that in the future we actually can reinsure that the urban tissue of Warsaw will be resilient. So I just have last slide. We are talking about the vision. We already have climate policy in Warsaw. It's called Warsaw Green Vision. And first step was to introduce building standard, green building standard. And next step is going to introduce a climate city contracts that is actually now happening for 2 districts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. This is very interesting how you see the vision of the cities and where you can build, when you can develop these desirable densities and see the cities as an ecosystem and not just an addition of building. I have a follow-up question for you, Kelly, before we move to you. For each of you, actually. So you were saying that you were working with the city of Toronto. So in line of this work, what are the key few policies that you think are the land use policies that you think are the most impactful in terms of embodied emission, especially?
Yeah, a few, and evidence that they're already happening. One, remove parking minimums. We have got to make parking not the problem of a building to solve, and moreover, we need to be decoupling our built environment from cars. So I think that is something any municipality should be doing right now, get rid of minimums. 2, the definition of floor area, even in the FAR coverage. I'd be very curious to know how basement area is part of that or not. We need to make all floor area part of the calculation. There should be no exceptions, and there's parts of the world, I used to live in Kigali, Rwanda, all floor area should be considered floor area. And 3, I think they're just a full-scale review of the assumptions of what makes good cities. Things like angular planes need to be reviewed in light of, I think, everything we just saw, including Laura. I think we live with a kind of baggage of ideas of what made good cities, and I think what we see now is there's a lot of unintended consequences in what we deemed good urban design that requires a really thorough review and to move forward potentially without much of it.
Thank you very much. Parking requirements, Meyer city thinks it's only a matter of transport and transport emission, but I think it's very important to make the connection with embodied emission. Stéphane, you were sharing with us this very ambitious strategy, objective, policies that you are going to integrate in the PLU. How the private sector is reacting? What is the challenge that you are facing?
Well, that's the key question, because the municipality doesn't build the city. We need that the owners of the land, all the stakeholders, play the game. So we have to work hand in hand with the private sector. The public sector must set targets, clear targets, achievable targets. That's important, and to help all the different stakeholders to move in the right direction. The tools for that are, of course, the regulation, but we also have some other tools such as taxation and an industrial policy, I would say. One of the main challenges is to have, for example, supply chains of new materials. It's easy to say that we don't want cement and bad materials with lots of carbon anymore, but if you don't have an alternative, how can they do that? So we need to organize. France is a big country. We have big forests, but we produce very little wood for the buildings. We import most of the wood. So we have to work with all the nation, all the economical sector to achieve that. And the private sector must understand that any change of habit is a problem, of course. But to have green buildings is a chance for the private sector, because it increases the value of the buildings in a long-term perspective, the liquidity of buildings. We know that buildings which have to use lots of energy to heat themselves in 10 or 20 years' time won't be profitable anymore. So you have to anticipate that and to ensure that you take the right decisions now. And lastly, bioclimatic architecture can be more expensive to produce. So that's why we need some fiscal taxation tools, which often depend from the national governments, so that you have a balance of choice, and that the pure economic rationality doesn't bring the economic actors to reproduce bad habits which are not in the right direction.
Thank you, thank you. Same question a little bit to you, Monica. How the private sector is reacting, and what type of challenge you are facing while you are developing your new land use strategy?
Yeah, we do not have problem with developer to use like renewable
You are lucky.
energy renewable energy sources because that's what caused the energy crisis. So that's one plus. But of course we have plenty of challenges, I would say. So yeah, what already was said, yeah, we need top-down regulations. We need system of taxation, and we need system of subsidies. We have some, but that's at the moment not enough. So what I see a problem with, for example, the standard green building standard, it's that we need subsidies to deal with stormwater management. That's the big issue, because we see that each summer we actually do have flooding problems. So it has to be solved, and in public spaces, but as well on the plot. The other issues are actually illegal. We do not have enough legal tools to make agreements with private sector in negotiations. And now the new regulations for spatial planning is introduced in Poland, and we are hoping that here we are going to have more field to negotiate and actually share costs.
Thank you very much. And now I'm turning over to you, Christian. So you represent here the business, the voice of the business, and your company, your organization, Urban Partners, is one of the leading organizations who try really to apply this type of ambitions, performance objective in their overall portfolio. Could you maybe quickly give us an overview of Urban Partners, and how do you integrate this strategy?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the insights from the various cities. So Urban Partners is an investment organization, and we are the private sector, right? We are actually the money that's going to go take these rules and hopefully develop sustainable livable cities. To put it in context, we are 21 billion euros, and we have a strategy across two areas. One, we back and scale sustainable solutions with private equity and venture capital. And then we build and finance places through NREP, which is a Nordic and now Poland and Germany real estate developer, real estate private equity firm that builds at city scale. And then through a credit platform called Velo that lends brown to green retrofit money to others along with the knowledge on how to do it. So the idea for us, some of the criticality for us is that the solutions that we try to scale have to be at price parity at some point soon with what they're replacing. That we don't believe that the green premium is actually scalable. The green premium can be absorbed by a Danish developer because their tenants want it, but it's not going to be a global solution. So we need to see how we can actually scale solutions. As an example, a company that we backed in the US is called Luxwall, makes hyper-efficient glass, R value of 18 for you geeks in the room. That R value of 18 glass is on price parity, or will be on price parity with double pane windows, and can be retrofit into existing single pane glass frames. Then that was the critical reason for us, how do you actually put in efficient stuff that does not cost more? So the developer doesn't absorb the cost, but the tenant then gets the benefit. And then we scale that out through NREP into our own buildings, but then actually work with the ecosystem of the rest of the private sector to try to educate them on these solutions and teach them how to scale it out. And so why do we need to exist as this family of different types of financing? Well, because nothing like this actually is out there. Like there's real estate funds, there's venture capital funds, there's private equity vehicles. They all have the same ambition, perhaps, to make cities sustainable, but they work in silos. And for us, it was important to have that knowledge of my Swedish team that's really, really good at brown to green residential, helping educate the company that we invested in Germany called 1,5, that is the largest installer of solar heat pumps and HVACs across Europe. And so this coordination across real assets and solutions that we can then help scale out and open source for others to imitate. And we are at the core problem-driven. We try to identify the biggest problems in the urban environment and then figure out the right solutions and the right type of capital that can be deployed into them. So as an example, we talked a lot about cement and concrete. Big problem, massive global addiction around the world. We're not slowing down. So we've invested into two companies that do lower embodied concrete. One's called Carbon Cure, injects CO2 into concrete. Another one's called Biomason and makes cementitious material out of bacteria. Fascinating, and it actually works. And now we're deploying that across the globe. Carbon Cure, for example, is now being used in 800 factories in every single continent around the globe. And NREP, my real estate sister fund, happens to be the first user of that solution in Europe by pouring it into the basement, unfortunately, of a building in Denmark. We look at the infrastructure of cities, right? So water is a massive issue. Water is not really a venture capital investment, it's more of an infrastructure investment. How do we think about that as we plan out cities? How do we think about the energy efficiency of the buildings that we're building and what we actually build them with? How do we actually educate financing organizations on why building a more sustainable building is going to be better economics for them, so they lend us and others money with better rates? That improves the economics of the investment. It makes economic sense to be sustainable, not just feel-good sense. And so across these problem sets, we spend a lot of time actually investigating them, talking to experts. I'm going to follow up with you in London on this, to then try to deploy solutions and talk very loudly about them. Tell the rest of the world why it's been a good economic sense as well as good tenant sense in terms of energy efficiency of the building, tenant experience. And we're doing it at scale already. This is not a building here and a building there in Stockholm or Munich or logistics center in Poland. We are building at a zip code level scale. So the first project that we did in Copenhagen is called Nordhavn, which Forbes magazine called the most sustainable neighborhood in the world. It was an old Maersk shipping port that's been completely transformed into residential, shopping, there's a school, financial institutions. It's a new, vibrant neighborhood, literally in the middle of Copenhagen. Zip code, by the way, 2150, which is where my venture capital name comes from. And this is actually like a vibrant center. And it's really interesting how we partnered with the city of Copenhagen, who actually owned the land, with financial partners to actually scale it out. Urban Partners itself did not build that many buildings. It was other people that built the majority of the buildings. We were the master planner behind the project. And the one thing that we kept was the right to decide what went on the ground floor of every single building. And we have a guy, it actually is a guy, that goes around curating what restaurant's going to go there, what neighborhood, what supermarket's going to go there, what flower shop's going to go in the corner, ensuring that the social fabric is integrated into the financial project of a real estate development at city scale. We have a new project also starting in Copenhagen called the Railway District. It's a massive amount of land, very similar to King's Cross in London, in the middle of Copenhagen, that'll get redeveloped, 500,000 square meters. They'll get redeveloped into residential and commercial, social aspects to it. So we want to apply these knowledge, these problem solutions at a big scale, right? Not just the building by building, but actually at city level scale. But that's only solving the problem in Copenhagen still means we have a massive problem worldwide. So how do we take this knowledge and all this work that we've done in different geographies and scale it out globally? And that's where Ellen comes in, and our partnership with C40, which we announced 2 years ago now on the Green Thriving Neighborhoods program, where C40, through their network of mayors around the world and urban partners, through our knowledge and experience, having done this at scale, can go help mayors make the decisions, identify solutions, and implement these programs and pilots in their own cities. We have no financial incentive from this. We actually really just want to tell the rest of the world how we've done it and how you can do it at scale, and by the way, make a lot of money doing it. And so thank you to C40 for the amazing work you've done with us on helping to tell others, and actually the invitation and convocation to be here today.
Thank you, Christian. And today we have we are developing through this program more than 22 pilots all across the world, global south, global north, to help to think how we plan the city at the neighborhood level. Laura was mentioning that, and we are partnering also with UN Habitat on this. And we have a network of many cities, more than 50, who are following this work very actively. I have a follow-up question for you, a little bit a form of reaction to what you heard from the city. How, as a developer, as a pioneer developer, if I can say, you react to cities who are raising the bar? Is that good news? And what also you see as a potential impact on your business, and how you could maybe advise a little bit the cities on how they could better collaborate with the business sector to accelerate, to advance this agenda with you?
I think the challenge here is the city, right? So take Germany, right? The rules of how to play in Germany are going to vary city by city. And if you're developing projects across the whole country, how do you actually normalize for what is the best practice? It's not going to happen that all the cities are going to have the same rules, but at least having best practice, I think C40 is well positioned to actually do that. Like the Paris plan, how can that get replicated across cities? We need consistency to be able to make investment decisions, especially at scale like this. These are 20-year projects for urban redevelopment. If we don't have consistency and certainty that the rules will be the same throughout the life of the project, the business case falls apart. And it's also an ability for us as the industry to come back to the city and to the regulators with our own vision of what's possible. So we are sponsors of an initiative called Leaders of the Urban Future, which is about $500 billion of real estate assets, BlackRock, GIC, Ivanhoe, Cambridge, and us, defining what we believe a net zero building looks like, and coming back to regulators with the toolprint, the blueprint of what that could look like, to try to educate them on what solutions might be. And then hopefully encourage them to adopt some of those. So consistency and long-term visibility, I think, is a critical part.
Very similar to what Stefan said, actually, about the need to give, to set the vision and to make sure that there is a form of consistency in that. Thank you very much to all of you for this discussion. The second panel, thank you very much. The second panel, will focus on land use policies to accelerate climate resilience. So we know that it's also a very important tool to mainstream climate resilience, not only through street open space, but also through each of the development of the cities. There is cities who are already doing that. São Paulo in Brazil has developed a non-environmental quota that require every new development, every major regeneration to incorporate a percentage of green space, to incorporate a percentage of permeable soil, and they go over. If a developer exceeds that, they will get some fiscal incentive. The city of Philadelphia has developed a specific zoning code to regulate activity land use in the flood plain, and they have published a very comprehensive guide on how do we develop around or next to this flood plain development. Toronto has developed a green roof bylaw that has developed a form of graduate green roof policies requirement for development and major regeneration. I could continue like that a lot. Cities are taking action, they are taking new policies, and that's what matters. So now, to go a little bit more in the detail of this discussion, I would like to invite on stage Cléa Daridan, who is a senior curator at Community Jamil. Cléa, thank you for joining us. Brigitte Bariol, who is the director of the FNO, the Federation of the French Urbanism Agencies, and Gadir Almoud, who is the deputy city manager for planning and economic development of the city of Amman in Jordan. And actually, I'm not totally sure Gadir is here because I heard they had some flight problem. So Gadir, I don't know. Okay. So I'm sorry, Gadir is not here, and it's a shame because we are working closely with the city of Amman right now, and Amman is revising its master plan. C40s, thanks to the support also to Community Jamil, are helping the city to revise their master plan and to integrate some of these policies in their master plan, especially on climate resilience. It would have been great to hear from them what they are doing. But let me start with you, Brigitte, who are here with us. So Brigitte, la FNO, the FNO, is working closely with the French Urban Agency, who are supporting, helping the local government across the country to integrate good urban planning policies and integrate climate resilience in their policy. Could you share with us a few examples of how cities are mainstreaming climate resilience through their land use policies?
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. As we have seen in the first round table, land use policies and planning is a good lever for mitigation. But for adaptation too, urban and territorial planning plays a key role in resilience and adaptation to the impact of the climate change. The challenge is not only to adapt cities to higher temperature, and for example, Paris has worked for 50 degrees temperature, what to do in this case. But the challenge is also to tackle all the effects of the climate change, such as erosion and submersion of coastal areas, flooding, depletion of freshwater resources, for example. The researchers of the Stockholm Resilience Centers have defined 9 planetary boundaries to keep a safe space for health ability, and 6 of them are already overcrossed, especially climate, biodiversity, soil consumption, freshwater cycle. So I will present a few examples through land use planning and master plans document in France. First, planning document must now in France take into account soil consumption reduction and the goal of no net land take in 2050 to fight urban sprawl. No net land take in 2050 is a common goal, but non-binding at the European level. And in France, the recent law Climate and Resilience asks every local authority to implement this objective in their regional or intermunicipal master plans, but in a binding way. At national level, it is a binding way, not at European level yet. So every French city is currently modifying its local plan, its master plan, to reduce the part of new areas for urbanization, less than 50 than the past urbanization last decade, and to develop building on brownfields to densify city centers and peri-urban areas we have seen before in the panel, and also organize renaturation of urban soil for health soil in the future. It is really a new social and economical model of urbanization to implement. And it's source of a lot of debates between local authorities. A second example about the development of canopy plants or vegetalization plants to limit the rising of temperature and especially to reduce urban heat island in cities. Temperature are higher than from 3 to 5 degrees, even in certain cases 10 degrees between peripheral areas and dense areas and urban center cities. And a lot of cities develop currently canopy plants to have a lot of plantation of trees to both refresh urban areas and also provide shades on public spaces. For example, the city of Bordeaux will plant 20,000 trees by 2025. It is also the case in Lyon metropolis with a canopy plan, which is a global framework to involve all stakeholders to work in plantation. A third way urban documents and master plans must anticipate the sea levels rise effect. For example, in France, 20% of the coastal municipalities will be affected by sea level rise and the coastal erosion. And several cities have now to anticipate and plan to remove housing, services, activities from their current space to more secure spaces. It opens a large range of questions of insurance, of change of destination, and it is a huge challenge to achieve for some cities, such as, for example, Caen, on the Manche coast, has developed urban project several years ago, and this project will be affected by the coastal erosion, and they have to move all the project and change the urban strategy with this. A last point, some cities currently use the concept of planetary boundaries and of a donut to shape their urban development and planning. It is the case, for example, of the city of Grenoble or Valence in France. The planetary boundaries identify the limit of resources, but these cities try to have a territorialization of their resources and limits at local scale. It is a sort of sailing of what they can do or not. And they use also the needs of inhabitants in housing, education, service that draw social flow. And the territorial development is think and discussed between these two limits. Maybe as a short conclusion, the planning can play a crucial role, taking into account the long-term effects, such as coastal erosion, also using nature-based solutions, more efficient and also affordable. And also, it is a way to have a democratic debate about the climate change effects and action.
Thank you, Brigitte. I think what is also very interesting, and every urban planner knows, it's a matter of integration. How reducing urban sprawl is a matter of climate resilience. It's also a matter of reducing transport emission, a matter of reducing building emission. So it's also important in these discussions that we have this holistic approach, and that's what we are discussing. I have a quick follow-up question, a little bit similar to the one. How the cities, the French cities, what type of challenge they are facing to adopt this type of policies at the land use level in their new policies?
I think they have to best identify their vulnerabilities. It's not easy to do in the European context, but it's more difficult to do it in the global south, for example, in informal settlements. They have to change their economic models and also all the narrative and representation how to live, for example, in small houses in peri-urban areas. And it is really important to have the spaces of debate within the master plans, and also to give priority to equity and to take particular attention to low-income people in an inclusive way.
Thank you. Very important element, the social impact of this type of policy. Thank you very much. Clea, I'm turning over to you. Community Jamil, we have been working together with you, C40 and Community Jamil, to support cities when they are revising their master plan to transpose the objectives that cities have set in their climate action plan to legally binding document in their master plan. We are especially supporting cities in the Southwest Asia region. Why it was important for an organization like Community Jamil to partner with us and to do this very important work?
First of all, thank you very much, Hélène, for your kind invitation. I'm very happy to sit on this panel with you, Brigitte. I'd like probably to provide a bit of background as to who we are, because I don't think many of you know about Community Jamil. We are an international independent philanthropic organization advancing science, at least we try, to advance science and learning for communities to thrive. We were launched in 2003, and the work that we've supported has led to significant breakthroughs, including Nobel Prize winning research by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo called the Jamil Poverty Action Lab, which you probably know about. So for over 20 years, we've supported scientists, humanitarians, technologists, and creatives to understand and address pressing human challenges. Now, when C40 and Hélène came to us mentioning urban planning, it did strike a chord, and the reason for that is evidence, basically. 2/3 of the world's largest cities are coastal delta cities who are vulnerable to rising sea levels, as Brigitte was mentioning. Only recently, while we were all at COP28 discussing climate emergency, Chennai was facing again a dreadful cyclone exposing 12 million people to extreme flooding and storms, threatening lives and economies, of course. Now, I come from Alexandria, Egypt, and in 2022, IPCC published a report mentioning that best case scenario, if the Mediterranean raises only 50 centimeters, by 2050, 30% of Alexandria will be flooded. 1.5 million or more people will be displaced. 195,000 jobs will be destroyed, and losses in land and construction will reach $30 trillion. We've set up with C40, the Jamil C40 Urban Planning Climate Labs, to assist rapidly growing cities in merging climate action with urban planning. decisions in urban planning, and I think that we've all gotten this by now, but they have a significant influence over how people live and move around a city. They impact cities' greenhouse gas emissions, of course. Without bold action, and we were just, having a try there's a risk of continuing with unsustainable development patterns, fueling carbon-intensive societies, when sustainable, inclusive, and resilient urban planning can actually offer a chance to mitigate and adapt to climate risks for not only decades, but potentially centuries. The Jamil C40 Urban Planning Climate Lab will support the integration of climate action in the new master plan of Chennai, India, and the urban planning regulations of Amman in Jordan. And I feel very sorry Ghadir wasn't able to join us, but I hope you will potentially hear about this work soon enough.
Thank you very much. A quick follow-up question, because we are starting with this region. It's a very important region for climate resilience. They face the double challenge of rapid demographic growth and very important already here climate risk. So, but how we could expand? What is the challenge to accelerate this very important agenda?
There's a huge challenge, unfortunately. The challenge is partnerships, basically. The idea is to be able to build those partnerships with other organizations, and we might as well just come to this a bit later. But I feel that the challenge is that the need is huge, and that organizations such as Community Jamil can't take over on their own. We need to build, partnerships with other organizations in order to be able to spread the work and to mainstream climate action.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clea. A lot to do. We are also supporting the other cities of the region, but the very specific program we are starting in Southeast Asia, I think it's exactly what needs to be done. Now, and I think I have a problem with this today. No, I'm very happy to thank you very much, Brigitte and Clea. I'm very happy to invite on stage Dr. Abdelkalek Ibrahim, who is the Assistant Minister for Tech Affairs, the Ministry of Housing, Utilities and Urban Community of Egypt, and Sharon Gill, who is a manager at the Cities Unit of UNEP. Both of them will wrap up this session and share with you also the call to action that the organizations who have prepared this session have prepared to ask that urban planning is integrated in the Building Breakthrough and the Global ABC agenda. And I hope you are now convinced about it. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello everyone. I'm sure you're all very hungry right now, so we're going to keep this short. And cold, Ibrahim is saying. We're going to keep this a little bit casual at this point, and I wanted to pose a few questions to Ibrahim. We heard quite a bit from the speakers in the room, and the many good examples from the cities in this session. What do you think are the key takeaways that we all need to remember from the two panels?
Okay, thank you for inviting us to this interesting and comprehensive session. And I would like to be very focused because we are behind the time. We have some reactions or some similar agreement on some points I would like to share. First, good urban planning is the solution for gas emissions and for the adoption of climate change, as Laura said, from UN Habitat. And in order to do that, we need to understand that the city as an ecosystem having different pillars, so including population, land uses, building, transportation, employment, and all of these pillars should be integrated together. So integration is important. So when, for example, looking for compact urban forum as a solution for sustainability, the compact urban forum is a link between land use, density, and transportation as well. So all of these issues should be integrated in order to have a solution for gas emissions. Also, regulation and law is important because in order to encourage people to be sustainable in terms of their life, we need a code, regulation, and awareness. And the role of the private sector is a key in enhancing the sustainability of cities. One final comment, or just it's a comment when Stephen talking about the existing urban structure and the demolishing of urban forum in some cities. We need to classify the urban forum because in some cities we have informal areas that can be, and the best use or the best option is to demolish, but we have an unplanned area or planned area that have been established recent ago, but we need to make upgrading and renovation of these cities. The issue of the compact urban form is also a critical point because we all know and agree to some extent that compact urban form may be a good solution for sustainability. But the compact urban form need good urban management. And the research indicated that the pandemic, the COVID, has impact more clear in the overcrowded cities and the compact cities as well. So we need to back to our thinking about how COVID maybe affect the city resilience, because by 2060 or 2050, by research, the number of deaths by climate change equal the number of deaths by COVID in 2020. So back to the issue of diseases and risk, we need to think about this point.
Well, that's a very sobering thought, Ibrahim. Maybe we move on to something a little bit more positive. Egypt is always a great champion of climate action. What are the related initiatives in your country to urban design for climate action, urban planning? And is there anything coming up in Egypt that you would like us to know about? Right.
In a minute, during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, with the assistance of UN Habitat, we have launched an international initiative for resilient and sustainable cities, which is Surge Initiative. And since then, the Egyptian government tried to transfer the national strategy for urban and climate resilient into a number of local actions. And usually the problem is how to transfer the overall strategies and policy into local actions. So in order to do that, we have three main needs to be started on: finance, awareness, and capacity building. So now we have in the Ministry of Housing and the Egyptian government already prepared a national strategy for green urbanism and green housing in Egypt, and established a special unit in terms of institutional framework responsible for the implementation of this strategy at the local level. But still, the finance is the critical issue, is how to finance this يعني projects and initiative.
That's very exciting. And I hear there's something exciting happening at the end of the year.
Yeah, يعني as I said, in COP27 when we launched Surge initiative and also hosted the first ministerial meeting for housing and environment. So now Egypt organized WOOF, the World Urban Forum, by the end of this year. And what we are trying to do is to link the outcomes from COP26 and 27 and 8 with WOOF as well, in order to have an overall framework to link the urbanization and climate. And by the way, one of the main dialogue of WOOF during WOOF, coming WOOF, is it's a time to save home on a warming planet.
Yes.
So this is the same topic that we are talking about, and we have a question will be raised about how can we make cities securing for sustainability and for sustainable future for people themselves.
No, I really love the way Egypt is connecting the different events. So they're not just events, but in fact a whole process of advocacy bringing us together around the issue of climate and urban planning. Now I'd like to go back to what Helene said in the beginning, that urban planning is one of the many important tools that cities can use for climate action and buildings decarbonization. I'd also like to reference and perhaps paraphrase Kelly's point on how planners are in fact the ones building the buildings, designing the buildings, exactly. And of course, as an urban planner myself, I think it's the most important tool. I will hear a lot of arguments here. And as evidenced by the experiences of Toronto, Paris, and Warsaw. Side note, thank you, Stefan, for making Paris, my life in Paris, a little bit more livable. I'm a big fan of your work. I'm based here, so thank you. And together with Egypt, my colleagues from C40 and those involved in this session, we have come up with a few points as a call to action emerging from this session. And Ibrahim, I really hope that we can bridge at the World Urban Forum these few points. I'm not going to list all of them, but the most important one, I think, is to advocate for the importance of urban planning for climate action, and especially for accelerating buildings decarbonation and a climate resilient environment. So we will be working with you in this room to bring this together to the World Urban Forum in Egypt, and we look forward to seeing you all there.
Finally, I would like to invite you all to participate in the coming WOOF in Egypt. And I think it will be a good platform for talking about many topics and interesting ideas like what we talked about this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to C40 colleagues for organizing this event.